Go Long by Hazel Witch. Read by Kaiinbed. Chapter 3. Dropping the Ball. Oi, watch the fuck out! The sky soared clear overhead on the cusp of November, crisscross aircraft trails swiping white brushstrokes through the blue. The trees, that clung to autumn with one last valiant effort, began to shed their leaves, crisp fragments of red and orange scattering across the ground. Izuku had just finished raking them all together in the center of the backyard, when a football sailed through the air and landed smack in the middle of his neat, tidy pile. Leaves flew everywhere, caught up by the wind. Half an hour's work ruined. Told you to watch out. Swiveling towards the voice, Izuku was in no mood to turn tail and run. Sure, he was pathetic, and sure, he spent most of his evenings indulging in all manner of degrading fantasies involving his hot, unattainable neighbor, but he'd also never been the kind of person to back down when someone was being a jerk. You know, it's more polite to warn people before you throw a football at their head, he said, planting his hands on his hips as he looked over to the fence. Katsuki was leaning over from his own backyard, arms crossed and propped on top in a position that fully accentuated his biceps. Izuku forced himself to keep his gaze fixed on his eyes. And it's not like the leaves could exactly watch out, could they? They're literally inanimate objects. That infuriating smirk was back again. Yeah, well, they ain't the only inanimate objects around here, I guess. Izuku gaped. What the fuck was that supposed to mean? If you're just going to stand there making fun of me, could you at least hurry up and get it over with so I can spend the rest of my weekend in peace? He replied dryly, waiting for the next verbal blow to land. But Katsuki's face dropped, the devilish grin that spread across his face replaced by a furrowed brow. Dude, relax. I was fucking joking. I'll help you with the damn leaves, alright? He rolled his eyes and pushed himself off the fence, voice lowering to a mutter. No need to get so fired up about it, jeez. They worked in awkward silence for the first few minutes, Katsuki brandishing his rake in violent scratches against the earth that visibly damaged the grass beneath. Izuku bit his lip, unwilling to point it out in case it somehow tarnished the sudden, weird partnership that sprung up between them out of nowhere. So, he said eventually, not looking up, how are you finding UA? His question was met with a grunt, something that didn't really resemble speech, but could just about be interpreted as, it's alright, if Izuku tried really hard to translate it. Noted. Small talk was not something Katsuki Bakugo enjoyed then. That was okay. Izuku was known for being able to take the lead in a conversation. I saw you at the game a few weeks back, he said, bending down to pick up a heap of leafy debris and depositing it on their pile. You were so... Well, I don't need to tell you. I did think for a moment you were going to get pummeled into the ground by that guy from Shiketsu, though. He's huge. Inasa. Huh? The guy's name is Inasa. Fucking built like a brick house. Yeah, exactly. But the way you dodged at the last moment, amazing. No broken legs and a win for UA? Next stop, the state championship, right? Anyway, I play in the band. I'm the guy that does the fanfare, so you've probably seen or at least heard me. Christ, you always this fucking chatty? Katsuki muttered, dumping his own armful onto the ever-growing pile. Anyone ever tell you you'll give yourself an aneurysm with all that damn enthusiasm? Reddening immediately, Izuku clenched his mouth shut with a nod of his head. Words to that effect, yeah. He wasn't really sure that it counted as bullying, what he had experienced in middle school. More just intentional exclusion from any and all activities. It'd been a lonely few years, navigating the world as if he was, for all intents and purposes, invisible, and the insecurity it bred still lay heavy on his heart. It made him all the more grateful for Ochako and the other members of the marching band, at least. They continued quietly after that, the atmosphere somehow even more tense than it had been before. Still, the fact that Katsuki was helping was surprisingly nice. Definitely unexpected, even if it was just what any decent human being would do in the same position. It's just you and your mom then? Izuku's head flicked up involuntarily. Katsuki wasn't looking at him, was apparently still focused on attacking the task at hand with an unnecessary level of aggression. Yeah, it's just me and my mom, Izuku said, following Katsuki's lead and avoiding further eye contact. It's always been that way. My dad, he was never in the picture. Noting the curt nod of the blonde head from the corner of his eye, Izuku decided to venture on. And it's just you and your dad? Hmm, okay. They were back to Neanderthalic grunts. Fine. They were basically done now anyway. Better that way. Huh? Just being me and dad. My mom's a crazy old hat. Oh. Izuku didn't really know what to say to that, his mind whirring as he considered the most sensitive way to respond. Um, alright, looks like we're finished here. Katsuki parted his palms and let the final few leaves drift to rest atop the others. Breaking the pensive mood, he bent and scooped the football from the floor. Think fast. He jolted his arm towards Izuku, who dropped his rake in shock and threw up his hands to cover his face. Only messing with your Deku. Cackling, Katsuki tucked the ball beneath his arm and lofted over the fence. An impressive feat considering it was at least 5 feet tall. Izuku heard the slam as he landed heavily on the other side, and was left pondering what exactly had just taken place as Katsuki Bakugo walked away. With the reminder of the semester stretching out before him, Izuku put his head down and got to work. It was a busy time. The deadline for most college scholarship applications closed towards the end of November, and with the added pressure of homework, tests, extracurriculars, and regular shifts at his mom's cafe, he found most hours of his day accounted for. Whenever it felt like things were getting out of control, whenever he felt the unwelcome grip of stress winding around his chest, Izuku would slip his phone from his pocket, open up the Stanford University website, and allow himself to dream. College, a place where he could reinvent himself, where no one would know he'd once been a weedy, unpopular dweeb. A place he could learn new things, meet new people, could escape his small town cage, and fly high on wide world dreams. It was the promise of a life he'd been waiting for, a turning point he was sure would change everything. So when the paper landed back on his desk, a red C circled in the top right-hand corner, it felt as if a sluice of ice water had been dumped over his head. Stay behind after class, Midoriya, Mr. Aizawa said as Izuku stared down at the mocking little letter in panic. I think we should have a talk. The rest of the lesson dragged by like wading through treacle. Treacle that somehow coiled up and around Izuku's legs like a sludge monster in a horror movie, dragging him under until his mouth and nose and ears were filled with it too. After a very slow 45 minutes, the bell finally rang for lunch, and Izuku waited until the rest of his classmates had filed out of the door before collecting his things and heading to the front of the room to lurk at his teacher's desk. You're taking on too much, Aizawa said, sitting back with his arms crossed, the offending paper between them. Izuku's teeth sunk into his bottom lip, aggravating it back and forth until he felt it turn sore. I don't think I am, he mumbled, the pain in his lip just about subduing the tears that prickled at his eyes. Okay. Aizawa gave him a look that could strip away even the grandest of egos. Then list off all the extracurriculars you're signed up to. Izuku sucked down a shuddering breath, his chest catching as he tried very hard not to cry. Marching band, Model United Nations, Science Olympiad, Robotics Club, and the Student Council. And you're working alongside that. Mm-hmm. And tutoring your classmates too. Only sometimes. It's too much, Izuku. Aizawa's voice remained even, somehow both exasperated and yet monotone all at once. But his eyes softened, under eye bags and all, betraying his concern. Look, I'm still going to write your letter of recommendation, but you need to start being smart, kid. Self-flagellation isn't going to get you into college. Grades are. You can't be getting C's at this point in the year. Izuku looked to the floor, internally chastising himself for not being able to keep the various plates spinning. If he'd only had a little more self-discipline, if he'd only worked harder, studied for longer. You're going to need to give something up. I don't care what, but something has to go. Okay. Nodding glumly, Izuku studied his beat-up sneakers. Get to lunch. Aizawa told him, Izuku still silent as he headed for the door. Halfway into the corridor, shoulders slumped and sad, there came a long whistling sigh from behind him. Midoriya. Yes, sir? Rewrite the paper this weekend. I'm feeling generous. Have it on my desk by Monday morning, and I'll see what I can do. Izuku looked back, trying to express his gratitude with a wobbly smile. Thank you, sir. I'll try not to let you down again. I have one brain cell. Izuku's voice came out muffled against the dull plastic of the table. The average human being has approximately 86 billion neurons, Midoriya. Shoto said from the seat beside him. Even a sea slug has around 10,000. Izuku let out a small groan. Great. Now he had to add sea slugs to the list of creatures more likely to get into college than him. I think what Todoroki is trying to say is that you have at least 2 brain cells, Izuku. Ochako added chirpily, trying to lighten the mood. Come on, it was just one paper. It can't be that bad, right? She lay a comforting palm on his back, rubbing back and forth across his shoulders. It's gonna be fine. From the other side of the cafeteria, there was a loud crash, followed by the tinkle of scattered utensils. Pushing himself up on his elbows, Izuku turned his head along with the rest of the room, in time to see a football bounce off Denki Kaminari's head, sending him toppling over backwards in his chair. Thud. Silence, then. I was only kidding! Denki squawked, legs in the air, back to the floor. It didn't take a genius to figure out who'd thrown the ball, not when the boy across from him sat with a smug sneer that somehow seemed to say, That's right, bitch. The rest of the football team whooped and fell into bouts of hyena-like laughter, Hanta reaching out a hand to haul Kaminari back up again. Their table in the corner of the cafeteria was infamous for rowdy behavior, the air so riddled with teenage boy hormones and BO that many a fellow student had been known to pinch their nose as they passed. From his lordly position leaning back in his chair, Katsuki's eyes darted to survey the land of lowly peasants surrounding him, and for a split second, he met Izuku's gaze. A beat passed as they held eye contact, a moment totally lost to the rest of the world, and Izuku could swear Katsuki's jaw slackened ever so slightly. But then the moment was gone. So fleeting it may as well not have happened. Katsuki leaning forward to swipe Denki's soda can from the table, and tilting his head back to drain it. Izuku watched the pulse of his throat as he guzzled it down, tendons straining in that sinewy neck. God, that new guy is such a jerk, Ochako said, turning her back on them. Don't tell me you still have some crazy crush on him, Izuku. Midoriya has a crush on the quarterback, Todoroki interjected, way too loudly for Izuku's liking. Shh, he hissed, ducking his shoulders down as if to hide himself. No one's got a crush on anyone, okay? Ochako snorted. You said, and I quote, he's so hot you could bake a batch of cookies on him. Ochako! And then, you said you could use his abs like a griddle pan to make yourself a grilled cheese. Ochako, please! And then, you said something like, oh, I bet he'd season me up real good. Izuku physically clamped a hand over her mouth. Oh my god, let me die in peace! Todoroki looked between them blandly, face unruffled as always. I think you need to find yourself a boyfriend, Midoriya, he said. Sounds like you're pent up. Yep, thanks, Shoto. Noted. Izuku let Ochako go and rubbed a hand back and forth over his eyes in sheer misery. God, his life was a mess. When Izuku finally made it home, he climbed the stairs like his legs ended in cinder blocks instead of feet. He had 3 assignments still to do, plus the paper to rewrite for Mr. Aizawa, plus 1,000,001 other things he could barely keep track of. He really needed to start immediately. Needed to sit down at his desk right away and study like his future depended on it. 'Cause it kinda actually did and all. But instead, he found himself slumping face first into his all-night bedspread, the tears he'd been holding back all day streaking down his cheeks. He let them come, pooling cold and wet on the bedclothes, chest heaving down short, sharp breaths as he cried. Why was everything so hard? Why could he never seem to get things quite right? A few self-indulgent minutes passed as he sniffled, allowing the bleak swell of anxiety to churn in his stomach, keeping his face buried and hidden in the comfort of the sheets. Eventually, once the ebb of emotion was completely drained, Izuku rolled to the side and forced himself up, ignoring the way his breathing stuttered here and there in little aftershocks that racked his body. There was no time to cry. The past few minutes were unplanned and totally accounted for. Wasted. In fact, he should probably start setting aside slots in his timetable for emotional breakdowns now and again. At least then he'd be able to stay on schedule. Stumbling across the room to his desk, still bleary-eyed and miserable, Izuku sensed movement from the corner of his eye. From the house next door. Of course, standing in the window, gawking over at him, was Katsuki Bakugo. And, of course, he was fucking shirtless. Because apparently this day hadn't already been bad enough. Izuku swiped an arm across his face, could sense that he was blotchy and red and swollen. Hands fumbling for the curtains so he could shut himself away from yet more embarrassment. Could pretend for a few precious hours that superbly hot blonde neighbors with chiseled abs, seriously, was that like an 8-pack or something? Did not exist. Through the shimmering haze of his vision, he could just about make out Katsuki, staring back at him with amber eyes that made Izuku feel like he was being boiled in his skin. Slowly, deliberately, the other boy raised his index finger, in exactly the same way he'd done it the first time, signifying Izuku to wait, just before he told him to fuck off. Charming, Izuku thought. God, Ochako was right. He was hot, but he was also a total douchebag. Izuku rolled his eyes, not wanting to stand and wait to be undermined again, to be made to feel even shittier than he already did. But something kept him glued in place as Katsuki ducked away from the window. Some morbid curiosity to see how he'd choose to tear Izuku's already crumbling dignity to shreds for a second time. His heartbeat tripled its speed when Katsuki shoved back into view, brows knitted low in a signature frown. The slip of paper in his hands was similar to the last, torn from a lined notebook and printed across in neat, purposeful letters. But this time, it said something else. "Wanna play ball?"